Vanessa Price had always been the strong one, the calm in the storm, the steady hand holding down her family when things went sideways. At 54, she'd lived long enough to know that life didn't play fair, but she never expected to feel so alone while still breathing. Her husband Ronald had been her anchor, her partner in every sense, and when a drunk driver took his life 3 years ago on a rainy Wednesday night, something in Vanessa broke that never fully healed. She kept moving because she had to, kept nursing shifts at Grady Memorial, kept showing up at Mount Olive Baptist for Sunday service, and kept pretending she was okay. But the house was too quiet, her bed too cold, and her heart too tired. Nights were the worst. That was when the silence crept in, whispering things she didn't want to hear. That maybe this was it. That maybe love didn't come around twice. But then came Dorian Hill. She first met him on a drizzly Thursday evening in early April at a grief support group called Grace After Grief. Vanessa had only started going to keep her friend Sharon off her back. "Girl, you need to be around people who understand," Sharon said, all but dragging her into the community center on Edgewood. And that's where she saw him, sitting 2 chairs over in a navy cardigan and a crisp white shirt, face smooth-shaven and eyes like quiet water. He looked like he carried stories. He introduced himself gently. "Dorian Hill. Lost my wife to cancer 5 years ago. Been a long road." There was something about the way he said it, soft but not pitiful, strong but not guarded. Vanessa found herself nodding, even smiling for the first time in what felt like months. In the weeks that followed, their conversations came easy. Dorian wasn't pushy, didn't flood her with sweet talk or compliments. Instead, he listened deeply. When Vanessa spoke about Ronald, about how sometimes she still made 2 cups of coffee without realizing it, Dorian didn't try to fix it. He just nodded, understanding in his eyes. He invited her out one Sunday afternoon to a book fair at Piedmont Park. He picked her up in a spotless silver sedan, opened the door for her, and played old jazz records on the drive. Vanessa laughed more that day than she had in years. He spoke about his past teaching chemistry at Emory University, about his love for natural remedies and herbal healing. She found it charming, even comforting. Dorian carried himself like a man who knew who he was, and made her feel like she was still someone worth discovering. For the first time since Ronald died, Vanessa felt seen. She started calling him her second spring. And as the cherry blossoms bloomed across Atlanta, so did something fragile and beautiful inside her: hope. She had no idea that behind Dorian's perfect smile was something far more dangerous than loneliness. Something patient, calculated, and cruel. Vanessa had always been cautious with her heart. She knew what it meant to carry grief like a shadow, to wake up beside a memory and tuck it in at night. But Dorian made her forget, if only for a little while, that life had ever been so heavy. Their days fell into a quiet rhythm. Dorian would swing by after her evening shift with chamomile tea and homemade lemon cookies. He never forgot her favorite snacks, remembered details she'd only mentioned once. He'd bring her handwritten notes with scriptures, sometimes a single rose wrapped in brown paper. He had a way of turning the ordinary into something that felt sacred. "You make it easy to breathe again," she told him one night as they watched the rain slide down her living room window. He looked at her with eyes that shimmered in the low lamplight. "That's all I ever wanted," he said, brushing a curl from her cheek. "To be someone's peace." They hadn't rushed things. For months, their love was soft. Hand grazes, knowing glances, lingering hugs on the front porch. When Vanessa finally let him stay the night, it wasn't impulsive. It felt like a blessing, long overdue. He was gentle, patient. And afterward, he held her like she was something precious. She'd forgotten how good it felt to be wanted, to be chosen. And then came the gifts. It started with a lavender night cream. "Just something I used to make back when I taught chemistry," Dorian said with a shrug. "All natural. Helps with stress and aging. You've got perfect skin, but I figured, why not preserve the masterpiece?" She laughed, flattered. "You trying to keep me looking 20 at 54? "I'm trying to keep you around forever," he replied. He made her herbal teas, vitamin capsules he called his special blend, and a daily moisturizer with an odd herbal scent like peppermint, but metallic. Vanessa teased him that he was trying to turn her into a science experiment, and he only chuckled. "Just love keeping my queen radiant," he said, slipping his arm around her waist. At first, Vanessa didn't question anything. Dorian was in every visible way perfect. Too perfect, maybe, but when you've been starving for affection, you'll forgive a man for being too good to be true. Still, some things didn't sit right. He never let her visit his apartment. Said he was subletting while his house was under renovation. Once, when she offered to do his laundry, he stiffened. "I've got a system," he said, brushing it off. "Old lab habits, order and routine, you know?" Sometimes, she'd catch him staring at her while she applied the cream, eyes fixed with almost clinical focus. When she asked what he was thinking, he'd smile and say, "Just admiring what God and a little chemistry can do." She laughed then, but that laugh didn't last. As the weeks passed, Dorian grew more affectionate, but also more controlling in subtle ways. He gently suggested she stop using her regular skincare products. "They're full of toxins," he'd say. "You've got me now. I'll keep you right." He insisted she take his vitamins every morning with water he brought her. He started massaging her shoulders every night, working in oils that smelled stronger each time. When she asked about the ingredients, he deflected. "Just natural things. From the earth," he said one night. "I'd never give you anything I wouldn't use myself." Still, she never saw him apply any of it. More red flags began to wave. Once, while Vanessa tidied up after dinner, she reached for his leather satchel to move it from the table. He grabbed it quickly, almost too quickly. "Sorry," he said with a tight smile. "Just some old journals, boring stuff. Work-related." She tried to shake the unease. Told herself she was being paranoid. After all, hadn't Dorian given her every reason to trust him? He prayed with her, listened to her stories about Ronald, helped her fix a leaky faucet, and brought soup when she was feeling run down. He was present. He was devoted. He was everything Ronald had been and everything he hadn't. And yet, there was the way he flinched when she touched certain parts of his arm. The night she woke up and found him standing at her window, whispering to himself. The way he never spoke about friends or family. When she asked if he had children, he said, "Not anymore," and left it at that. Still, Vanessa chose to believe the best. After all, she was finally smiling again. She was sleeping better, eating better. The fine lines on her face seemed to soften. She was glowing. Friends at church said she looked 10 years younger. Maybe that was the power of love. But love isn't supposed to make your skin itch. It isn't supposed to leave you bleeding when you wake up. And soon, the very man who made her feel alive again would introduce her to something far worse than loneliness. He would show her what it felt like to fall apart from the inside out. It started with a tingling behind Vanessa's ears. She barely noticed it at first, just as she blamed on her new headscarf. But over the next few days, the sensation grew more persistent, creeping down her neck like invisible ants. By the end of the week, small, dry flakes began to appear along her jawline. Still, she wasn't alarmed. Dry skin was nothing new. She dabbed on more of Dorian's night cream and went to bed early, chalking it up to the changing weather. But when she woke the next morning, her pillowcase was stained. At first, she thought it was makeup. Maybe the foundation hadn't come off all the way the night before. But then she looked in the mirror and froze. Patches of skin along her neck and behind her ears were raw, pink, and weeping. The edges looked peeled, almost as if they'd been scorched. She ran her fingers over them gently, wincing at the sting. Her breath caught in her throat. Still, she didn't panic. Nurses didn't panic. They assessed, treated, moved on. She applied an antibiotic cream and covered the area with gauze before heading to work. The pain dulled by noon, and she assured herself it was probably an allergic reaction to laundry detergent or fabric softener. At her age, the body was always finding new ways to complain. But by the third day, the rash had spread. It now wrapped around the back of her neck and began to blossom down her back in irregular, angry shapes. Her upper arms itched so violently, she had to excuse herself from a patient's room just to scratch. When she lifted her scrub top in the locker room and saw the oozing red streaks along her rib cage, her hands began to shake. Something wasn't right. That evening, Dorian came over as usual, holding a small jar of balm and a fresh batch of herbal capsules. Vanessa tried to act normal, but he could sense something was off. "You okay, baby?" he asked, setting the jar on the table. "I don't know. My skin's acting crazy. It's breaking down or something." He leaned in, brushing her hair back to look behind her ear. "Looks like a reaction to something external," he said thoughtfully. "Maybe something you've been using?" She tilted her head. "The only new thing I've used is your cream." He smiled, unfazed. "Could be something else, though. Stress? Diet? You've been run down lately." Vanessa hesitated, watching his expression. Calm. Collected. Too calm. "Maybe," she murmured. "Here," he said, unscrewing the jar. "Try this balm. It's a newer mix, no preservatives. Just let it sit overnight." She took it reluctantly, her stomach fluttering with unease. That night, she lay awake in bed long after Dorian left, listening to the hum of her ceiling fan and the pulsing sting beneath her skin. When she finally drifted off, her sleep was shallow, full of flickering dreams, burning, peeling, crying. She woke gasping at 3 a.m. The sheets were damp. Her back felt like it was on fire. In the bathroom mirror, she saw the full horror. Her left shoulder looked as if it had been scalded. The skin was yellowing and curling away at the edges. Beneath it, raw flesh throbbed angrily. A smell, faint but unmistakable, rotting meat, rose into her nostrils. She covered her mouth and stumbled back. She needed help. By morning, she was in an urgent care center near her job. The attending physician, a young man fresh out of residency, took one look and ordered a full blood panel. He asked if she'd been exposed to any chemicals or corrosive materials. She told him no. No industrial solvents? No insecticides? Nothing out of the ordinary? He asked again, peering at her arm under a magnifying light. "I'm a nurse," she said flatly. "Not a factory worker." He gave a tight nod. "This doesn't look infectious. It's something internal. Your tissues breaking down at a cellular level." She blinked. "What does that mean?" "It means your body is attacking itself, or something is helping it." They ran tests. Every autoimmune screen came back negative. No lupus, no scleroderma, no known bacteria, no fungal infection. The intern suggested a rare form of necrotizing dermatitis, but the senior physician dismissed it. They didn't have answers. One thing was clear: Vanessa's skin was deteriorating. Rapidly. By the end of the week, she developed lesions along her thighs and small, blister-like sores on her lower back. The smell worsened. She couldn't stand under hot water. Clothes rubbed her raw. At night, she lay on towels, soaked in pain, too humiliated to ask anyone for help. She stopped going to work. She avoided church. Friends left messages she didn't return. Even Sharon, her closest confidant, couldn't get through. And through it all, Dorian kept showing up. He brought soups, rubbed her feet, sat by her bed with concern in his eyes. But Vanessa couldn't ignore the voice rising in her gut anymore. Why wasn't he more concerned? Why did he never suggest the creams could be the problem? Why was he still pushing them into her hands? One night, after he left, she locked the door and sat in silence, staring at the half-used jar on her nightstand. Something inside her snapped. She threw it against the wall, watched it shatter like a curse finally breaking free. She picked up her phone with trembling fingers and called her niece, Tasha, a pharmacist at a nearby clinic. She didn't sugarcoat it. "I think I'm being poisoned," Vanessa said, voice low. "And I think he's the one doing it." Tasha didn't hesitate. "Bring everything he gave you. Tomorrow morning." Vanessa gathered every capsule, every cream, every bottle. The next morning, Tasha sent them off for testing, unofficially through a contact in toxicology. 3 days later, the results came back. The creams contained synthetic peptides designed to mimic natural amino acids, but with one sinister twist. They caused cellular decay at the epidermal level. In short, they told her skin to rot. The pills contained enzyme disruptors and trace compounds used in early-stage chemotherapy research, banned outside of experimental labs. "This ain't skincare," Tasha whispered, horrified. "This is slow chemical warfare." Vanessa sat frozen, hands shaking. "He said he was just helping me heal." Tasha looked at her aunt, eyes filled with fury and fear. Auntie, you've been sleeping beside a monster. And somewhere across town, Dorian, if that was even his real name, was preparing her next dose. Smiling in the dark, believing she still trusted him. But that trust had rotted, just like her skin. And now, the only thing Vanessa wanted more than survival was the truth. Vanessa didn't sleep that night. She sat in her living room, wrapped in a soft throw blanket, hands curled tightly around a mug of tea she didn't drink. Her skin stung beneath her sweatshirt, the raw patches pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. The words Tasha had spoken kept replaying in her mind like a scratched record. Slow chemical warfare. Sleeping beside a monster. How'd she missed it? She looked around the room, her eyes catching on all the little pieces of him still lingering. The half-read book he left on her end table. His ceramic mug still in the sink. The soft jazz playlist he made on her Bluetooth speaker. All of it felt like evidence now. Props in an act designed to disarm her. By sunrise, Vanessa wasn't just angry. She was focused. She texted Dorian that morning, keeping her tone warm. Feeling better, she wrote. Would love to see you tonight. He replied with a heart emoji. I'll bring the new serum, he added. Vanessa forced a smile as she read it. Good. Let her bring the poison. Let him walk right into the trap. But first, she needed help. She drove to the Midtown Police Precinct in oversized sunglasses and a scarf wrapped around her head, trying to hide the peeling skin along her jaw. Inside, the walls smelled like disinfectant and old coffee. She asked for the detective on duty and was led to a gray-walled office with a nameplate that read, Detective Elijah Boone. He looked up as she entered, mid-50s, African-American, bald with a salt and pepper goatee, eyes like steel behind a pair of reading glasses. He reminded her of the old deacons from her church, firm, calm, and not easily rattled. Ms. Price, he asked, rising slowly. How can I help you today? Vanessa closed the door behind her and sat down. Her hands trembled as she placed a Ziploc bag of capsules and a small brown jar on his desk. I think the man I'm dating is poisoning me. That got his attention. She explained everything. The creams, the pills, the skin decay, the lab results from her niece's contact. She told him about his refusal to let her see his apartment, his obsession with mixing skincare, his odd comments, the way he stared at her like a science project. Boone didn't interrupt. He let her speak. Listen like he'd been doing it his whole life. When she finished, he sat back, arms folded. Dorian Hill, you said? She nodded. Boone turned to his desktop and began typing. After a few minutes of searching, he looked back up. There's no Dorian Hill teaching chemistry at Emory. No record of him licensed for any kind of chemical practice. No tax records, no property, nothing. Vanessa's stomach turned. So who is he? Boone picked up the Ziploc bag. Let's find out. That afternoon, he handed the fingerprints on the glass jar over to forensics. It didn't take long. The next morning, Boone called her. His name's not Dorian, he said. It's Darren Hollis. The name hit her like a punch to the chest. He's got a history, Boone continued. Expelled from Georgia Tech's graduate chemistry program 28 years ago. Accused of running unsanctioned human testing. 2 women came forward. Both developed unexplained skin lesions after using his so-called herbal treatments. No arrests, no convictions, but he disappeared not long after. Vanessa sat in silence. Boone went on. He reappeared 3 years ago under a different alias. Used various names. No job history. No fixed address. But he's been active. Why me? Vanessa asked, voice hoarse. There was a pause. Then Boone said, I pulled an old Georgia Tech yearbook. Class of 93. You're in it. She blinked. What? You were at Georgia Tech when he was. Your senior year. Guess who's in the chemistry department photo? 2 rows behind you. Vanessa's blood ran cold. A memory flickered. A quiet, awkward guy who once asked her to coffee after biology class. She turned him down politely, said she was already dating Ronald. He hadn't said much, just nodded and walked away. She hadn't thought about it in 3 decades. Boone sighed. We think he's been holding on to that rejection. All this time, Vanessa stared at the floor, her breath caught in her throat. So he came back to punish me. Looks that way. Boone leaned forward. Vanessa, I need you to be honest with me. Has he ever left anything here that might have DNA? A toothbrush? A glass? Anything. Vanessa pointed to the kitchen. His mug, still in the sink. Boone retrieved it and left with the team to dust and photograph everything. Meanwhile, Vanessa agreed to wear a wire that evening. She didn't feel brave. She felt terrified, but something deeper had taken hold now. Rage. A fire that burned stronger than fear. That night, Darren, showed up with a bouquet of lilies and a fresh vial of his new serum. "You're glowing tonight," he said, kissing her cheek. Vanessa smiled, forcing it. "Must be your magic cream." They sat on the couch. He poured her tea. He reached for her wrist, checking her pulse like a doctor. "You've been healing better than I expected," he murmured. She tilted her head. "Expected?" He looked up, eyes distant. "You're stronger than the others." Vanessa's pulse quickened. "Others?" He froze. "I meant clients. Back when I had a lab." "You mean the women you tested chemicals on?" she said, voice calm. His gaze darkened. He leaned back, crossing one leg. "They weren't worthy. They were impatient. Weak. You've endured." Vanessa felt sick. "You remember college?" he asked suddenly. "You wore red lipstick that day. Told me you were taken. You didn't even give me a chance." Her hands went cold. He remembered everything. "But now," he whispered, "you've been mine. Every night. Every inch. You trusted me. That's real intimacy." And just like that, the smile slid from her face. She stood. "I need to use the bathroom." He nodded, staring at the vial like it was sacred. As soon as she stepped into the hallway, Boone and his team swarmed in through the back door. Darren stood no chance. He lunged, tried to flee, but was tackled to the floor. As the officers cuffed him, he looked up at Vanessa with something that looked like pride. "You'll never be the same without me," he said. She didn't respond. She didn't have to, because in that moment, she realized something more chilling than his poison. He didn't just want to hurt her. He wanted to be remembered. The precinct lights buzzed softly overhead as Vanessa sat across from Detective Boone, her hands wrapped around a styrofoam cup of lukewarm coffee. She hadn't said a word since Dorian, was taken away in handcuffs. The sound of him saying, "You'll never be the same without me," echoed in her mind like a curse. She wasn't afraid of him anymore. No, fear had come and gone. What lingered now was something deeper, disgust and grief. Not just for what she'd lost physically, her skin, her sense of safety, but for how easily she had opened the door and let him walk right in. "You did everything right," Boone said gently, breaking the silence. She looked up, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. "Then why do I feel like such a fool?" He gave a slow shake of his head. "Because you were human. You trusted someone who looked you in the eye and told you he loved you. That's not foolish. That's brave." Vanessa didn't respond. She just stared at her trembling fingers, the pinkish gauze wrapped around her forearm. The pain was constant now, dull and electric at once. But the betrayal was worse. Boone leaned forward. "I want to walk you through what we found." She nodded, steeling herself. "His real name is Darren Hollis," Boone said. "Born in Birmingham. High school valedictorian. Full ride to Georgia Tech, published 2 peer-reviewed chemistry papers by the age of 22. People thought he was brilliant. But in his final year, something shifted. He started skipping ethics boards, conducting experiments off the record. His lab partner reported him for using non-approved compounds in human topical tests. Vanessa flinched. 2 women, both students, filed complaints. Boone continued. So they used creams he gave them. Both ended up with rapid tissue degeneration. Same symptoms you had, flesh peeling, unhealed lesions. The school expelled him. No criminal charges stuck. "Why?" Vanessa asked. Boone frowned. "Not enough physical evidence." The women had already started healing by the time the tests came back. Darren denied it all, claimed they were bitter exes trying to ruin him. The system failed them. Vanessa closed her eyes. "After that, he vanished," Boone said. "Reappeared 3 years ago in Atlanta. Fake names, fake IDs, odd jobs here and there. But this time, he didn't just want to experiment. He wanted you." She looked at him. "Me?" Boone slid a manila envelope across the table. Inside were pages from an old notebook, yellowed, ink faded but legible. Darren's handwriting filled the margins with obsessive precision. "She was the first to dismiss me. She didn't laugh, didn't mock, but that made it worse. I watched her from the chemistry building. She walked like she owned the world. She will fall piece by piece until she understands what rejection does to a man who sees through skin. Vanessa's breath caught. The words blurred as tears welled in her eyes. All of this was about something that happened 30 years ago, she whispered. Boone nodded solemnly. He's been nursing that resentment for decades. Your face haunted him. He made it his life's mission to make you suffer in silence. Vanessa pressed her hands to her face. My God! And he almost succeeded, Boone said. But you saw through it. You lived. And now we've got enough to bury him. Over the next few weeks, the pieces fell into place. Investigators searched Darren's storage unit, where they found jars of his chemical formulations, labeled with grotesque names like Beneath the Surface and Decay 4. There were folders of photos, Vanessa's, taken without her knowledge, and other women too. Women who had never come forward, likely too ashamed or afraid to speak. Police now suspected he may have tested low doses on women he dated in other cities before Vanessa. But none of them had been tracked or reported. In the weeks leading up to the trial, Vanessa underwent skin grafts and began aggressive treatment to stabilize the damage. Her body was healing slowly, but the process was agonizing. Some nights, she couldn't sleep from the itching or the searing nerve pain. Other nights, she stared at the ceiling and thought about how close she came to dying in her own bed, at the hands of a man who whispered, I love you, while planning her destruction. But she wasn't going to hide. She told Boone she wanted to testify. The courtroom was full on the first day of the trial. Media outlets called it the Skin Widow case. The courtroom sketches painted Darren as a charming academic turned madman, and Vanessa as the courageous survivor who stood between his past and future victims. Darren sat expressionless through most of it, dressed in a charcoal suit, hands folded, his eyes occasionally darted to Vanessa. But she never looked away. She wore a burgundy blouse, her gauze-covered hands neatly tucked into her lap, a silk scarf around her neck. Her voice never wavered. She told the jury about the creams, the pills, the slow, inexplicable unraveling of her body. The night she found lesions on her back. The moment she realized the man who claimed to love her was watching her rot. I let him into my home, she said, into my life. And he didn't just hurt me physically. He made me question my own instincts, my own heart. She paused, looking at the jury dead in the eyes. But I am still here, she said. I am still standing, and I will not be the last woman he tries this with, unless you make sure of it. The courtroom held its breath. Darren's attorney tried to claim diminished responsibility, suggesting he was mentally ill, driven by an obsession beyond his control. But the evidence was overwhelming. The journals, the lab notes, the forged identities, the sheer planning behind every step of his relationship with Vanessa. The jury deliberated for just under 2 hours. Guilty, attempted murder, aggravated battery, use of biological agents with intent to harm. He was sentenced to 42 years without parole. Vanessa didn't celebrate. Not that day. But when she stepped outside the courthouse and the fall breeze touched her scarred skin, she took a deep breath for the first time in months. Justice wasn't healing, but it was a start. The days after the trial felt like walking through the wreckage of a storm Vanessa never saw coming. The gavel had dropped, the cameras were gone, and Darren Hollis, once Dorian Hill, once the man she thought might be her future, was now just a number in a federal prison system. 42 years behind bars. It should have felt like triumph. But instead, Vanessa felt hollow. Healing was a slow, brutal road. Her doctors warned her the skin damage might be permanent in some areas. The grafts had taken on her left shoulder and upper back, but she still had patches of nerve pain that shot through her body like fire when touched too suddenly. Even simple things, putting on a blouse, sleeping on her side, became daily reminders of what had been taken from her. And yet, she never stopped moving forward. She left her nursing job at Grady Memorial, not because she didn't love it, but because she needed a new beginning. The hospital hallways held too many questions she didn't want to answer, too many looks of pity. Instead, she poured herself into a new purpose, one born from the fire she'd walked through. She started a support group called Second Skin, for women over 50 who had been victims of psychological abuse, manipulation, or violence in romantic relationships. At first, it was just 5 women gathered in a church basement. By the 3rd month, the group had grown to over 20. Women from all walks of life, retired teachers, grandmothers, caregivers, came together and told their stories. And Vanessa told hers. Every word, not for sympathy, but so the women sitting in front of her would know they weren't weak for trusting. They weren't foolish for hoping, and they damn sure weren't broken for surviving. One evening, after the meeting ended and chairs were being stacked in the corner, Detective Elijah Boone lingered behind. He had stopped by a few times since the trial, always quiet, always respectful. Tonight he brought coffee. "You ever sleep these days?" he asked, handing her a steaming cup. "Not much," she smiled, "but I rest. And that's more than I could say last year." He chuckled. "Well, that's a start." They sat in silence for a moment, watching the last of the women file out. Vanessa glanced at Boone. His weathered face softened under the fluorescent lights. "You ever think about what happens when the story ends?" she asked. He took a sip of his coffee. "What do you mean?" "I mean after the courtroom, after the headlines fade. Nobody ever talks about the quiet, the stillness that comes after the chaos. It's almost louder than the storm." Boone nodded. "It is. That's when people either heal or harden." Vanessa looked down at her hands, still wrapped in light fabric gloves. "I don't want to be hard. I want to be new. I want to grow something out of this, something that matters." "You already are," Boone said, his voice low but certain. She met his gaze, and in that brief look, she saw something unexpected, affection. Not pity, not professional concern, but something warmer, more human. A kind of understanding born from shared scars. They didn't speak about it then, but over the months that followed, Boone kept showing up at meetings, at her door with groceries, at the hospital on the day she had treatment. Their connection grew not from urgency or infatuation, but from quiet consistency. He didn't try to fix her. He just stood beside her, strong and steady, letting her heal at her own pace. And one spring morning, nearly a year after Darren Hollis was sentenced, Vanessa stood at the front of a packed church auditorium, her skin marked, her spirit unbroken, and gave a keynote speech at a citywide survivor conference. She spoke without notes. "I used to think pain had the final word," she began. "That once someone tore you apart, the only thing left to do was survive the wreckage. But I learned that pain, no matter how cruel, doesn't define who we are. Choice does. I chose to keep loving. I chose to keep trusting. Not blindly, not foolishly, but bravely." She looked out into the crowd, locking eyes with women who had once believed they were alone. "We are not what happened to us," she said. "We are what we rise from." The room rose with her, standing, clapping, crying. Later that evening, Vanessa sat on her porch with Boone, the sky awash in gold and lavender. A breeze moved through the wind chimes hanging from her porch roof, and for once, she felt still. Boone reached over and gently took her hand. "You ever think about dating again?" he asked, half teasing. Vanessa smiled. "I think I already am." By the time summer returned to Atlanta, Vanessa had learned to live with her scars. The mirror no longer startled her. The woman staring back wasn't the same one who had fallen for Dorian Hill's soft words and gentle hands. No, this woman had earned every scar on her skin. She had walked through the fire and made it out alive. And while her reflection bore reminders of everything she'd lost, her eyes carried something stronger, clarity. Her mornings began slower now. No more rushing into scrubs or skipping breakfast to beat traffic. Instead, she brewed coffee with intention, opened her curtains to let in the Georgia sunlight, and played Nina Simone while journaling by the window. She didn't wear makeup much anymore, didn't feel the need to cover up what she had survived. Her support group, Second Skin, had grown beyond anything she imagined. What began as a few folding chairs in a church basement had now moved into a proper community center, funded by a small grant from a local foundation. Word had spread. Women came from neighboring counties. Some brought friends, some came alone, trembling at the door, but all of them left lighter. Vanessa never claimed to be a therapist. She wasn't there to diagnose or analyze. She was there to bear witness, to hold space, to say, "You are not crazy. You're not weak, and you are definitely not alone. And when Detective Elijah Boone wasn't chasing down leads at the precinct, he could usually be found sitting in the back row, quietly supportive, always watching her with the kind of respect most men forgot how to show. Their relationship had never been labeled. They didn't rush into anything. There were no long conversations about what are we. They simply spent time together. Boone would swing by with barbecue on Sundays or pick her up for a drive along Lake Lanier. He called her V sometimes, and when he laughed, it was low and rough, like an old jazz record. One night, as they sat on her porch watching a storm roll in, Vanessa finally asked, "So what is this?" Boone leaned back in his chair, sipping his iced tea. "This?" He glanced at her. "This is whatever you want it to be." She laughed. "That's a politician's answer." He grinned. "All right then. This is me, wanting to be here. With you. No agenda. No timelines. Just here." Vanessa looked at him, then down at her gloved hands. "You don't mind scars?" He didn't hesitate. "Scars mean you healed. What kind of man would I be if I couldn't love a woman for living through hell and still showing up with grace?" She swallowed hard. It had been so long since a man made her feel safe without asking for anything in return. Later that summer, she was invited to speak at Emory University for a panel on ethical failures in scientific research. It was the first time she'd returned to a college campus since her own days as a student, since the days Darren Hollis sat behind her in chemistry class, silently plotting revenge for a rejection that was never personal. She stood at the podium in a fitted blazer, her shoulders proud, her voice calm. Students listened closely as she described how charisma could be weaponized, how abusers wore masks made of compliments, how real monsters didn't always kick down your door. Sometimes they brought flowers and rubbed lotion on your back while your body broke down. "It's not the science that's dangerous," she told them. "It's the soul behind the science. A mind without empathy is the sharpest weapon there is." Afterward, one young woman approached her with tears in her eyes. "I think I dated someone like that. I didn't realize how deep it had gone until you spoke." Vanessa hugged her tight. "This is why I keep telling it," she whispered, "so you don't have to carry it alone." By autumn, Vanessa had begun to dream again. Not nightmares, but dreams of quiet homes, blooming hydrangeas, a kitchen filled with jazz and the smell of cinnamon rolls. Dreams that included laughter, softness, love. And one crisp October evening, as golden leaves drifted across her lawn, Elijah Boone knelt on her porch, not with a ring, but with a question. "Can I grow old with you?" Vanessa stared at him, stunned. He smiled. No pressure, no big ceremony, no expectation. Just, "Let me be the one who brings you tea when your hands ache. The one who holds your stories when you're tired. The one who knows your scars and loves every inch anyway." Tears welled in her eyes. She laughed, then cried, then laughed again. "Yes," she whispered, "you can grow old with me." The following spring, they planted a garden behind Vanessa's house. Hydrangeas, peonies, sunflowers. Life bloomed again, not just in the soil, but in her chest. She wasn't the woman who had once been broken in her own bed. She was the woman who survived, who rebuilt, who refused to let darkness define her. And every time she looked at the scars on her arms or the healed patch across her back, she didn't see tragedy anymore. She saw proof that she had once been buried in grief, and chose to rise anyway. It had been 2 full years since Darren Hollis was sentenced. 2 years since Vanessa Price stood in that courtroom and reclaimed her voice. 2 years since her skin stopped peeling, but her soul had only just begun to grow back. Some wounds don't scream. Some just sit quietly in your bones, whispering doubts at midnight. And some, like the ones Darren left behind, were deep enough to echo. But Vanessa had learned something most survivors take a lifetime to understand. You don't have to wait to feel whole before moving forward. You just have to start walking. And walk she did. By now, Second Skin had evolved into a full nonprofit organization, complete with a board of directors, a website, and a network of trauma counselors who volunteer their services. They hosted monthly workshops, partnered with local shelters, and held candlelight vigils every October for Domestic Violence Awareness Month. Vanessa never imagined she'd become the face of anything, but life had chosen her. Not kindly, but clearly. One afternoon, she stood outside a church in Marietta, waiting for a van full of women from a halfway house. She was holding clipboards, flyers, and a pitcher of sweet tea, doing what she always did, showing up. Boone pulled up in his Crown Vic, ever the old-school detective, even in semi-retirement. He stepped out in khakis and a button-up, holding a small potted plant wrapped in twine. "Sunflower," he said, handing it to her. "Thought I might like your front porch." Vanessa smiled. "I'm running out of room out there." "You keep making space," he said. "That's who you are." She glanced at him. "You staying for the workshop?" He nodded. "You kidding? Wouldn't miss it." Later that evening, as the last speaker finished and the applause died down, Vanessa stepped to the front. She didn't carry notes anymore. She didn't need them. 2 years ago, she began, I thought my story ended with betrayal. I thought pain had claimed the final word in my life. I thought love wasn't worth the risk. I was wrong on all counts. The room hushed. I was poisoned, literally. I watched my body deteriorate, watched trust corrode under the weight of a lie. But what I didn't know then was that pain doesn't get to have the last say. She paused, eyes sweeping across the audience. "I do." Applause broke out, soft at first, then rising, pulsing with affirmation. In the back row, Boone sat motionless, jaw tight, his eyes shining. Not from sadness, but pride. The next morning, Vanessa received an unexpected letter. Thick envelope. No return address. Inside, a short, typed note and a hand-drawn sketch of a rose. "Vanessa, I imagine you think I'm a monster. Maybe I am, but I didn't do this for revenge. I did it to understand the boundaries of love. Yours stretched farther than I expected. That makes you stronger than you know. You are always beautiful, even while unraveling. D.H." Her hands trembled as she read it. The paper smelled faintly of bleach and ink. She sat at the kitchen table, heart thudding in her ears. Boone arrived minutes later, after she called. "I didn't know inmates could send letters," she said, sliding it across the table. Boone scanned the note. "They can, but they're screened. This slipped through. Might have used a third party." Vanessa folded her arms. "He still thinks this is about beauty." Boone sighed, rubbing his jaw. "He hasn't changed. Probably never will." "I should burn it," she said. Boone nodded. "You could," but she didn't. She placed the letter in a locked wooden box in her closet, the same one that held her court documents, hospital photos, and the last scarf she wore in court. Not as a keepsake, as a reminder. That darkness has handwriting, and once you've seen it, you never forget the shape of it. Weeks later, Vanessa was invited to speak at a national women's conference in Chicago. The theme, Resilience Through Ruin. Thousands of attendees. A ballroom lit like a cathedral. Women in every stage of healing sat shoulder to shoulder. Vanessa stepped onto the stage, wearing a midnight blue dress that framed her tall frame like armor. The lights above were bright, but not harsh. She smiled, but not to dazzle. She smiled because she was still here. "My name is Vanessa Price," she said into the mic. "I am a nurse, a widow, a survivor of chemical abuse, and an advocate for second chances." She paused, letting the truth settle like breath in the room. "I once believed that healing looked like erasing the past, covering the scars, pretending nothing happened. But I've come to learn, healing is about honoring what we survived, not hiding it." The room was silent, hanging on every word. "My skin will never be the same," she continued. "There are days I can still feel the sting in my bones. But the greatest healing I've found isn't in creams or surgeries. It's in community, in telling the truth out loud, in refusing to let shame take root." The applause was thunderous, but Vanessa didn't flinch. She stood there grounded, rooted in the soil of her own rebirth. Back home in Atlanta, things slowed again. Boone had officially retired and spent his mornings tending to a small garden they built together. Tomatoes, collards, sunflowers. Vanessa loved the rhythm of it, planting, pruning, harvesting. It reminded her that even the things torn down can rise again. One evening, as they sat watching the sunset from their porch swing, Boone turned to her. "You ever think about writing a book?" She laughed. "Me? What'd I call it? How Not to Date a Mad Scientist?" He grinned. "I was thinking more like Second Skin. It's what you do best, help women rebuild." She rested her head on his shoulder. Maybe one day. Right now, I'm just enjoying the quiet. And for the first time in a long, long while, the quiet didn't feel threatening. It felt like peace. Epilogue. Vanessa Price never forgot what was done to her, but she never let it define her either. She turned trauma into testimony, pain into purpose. Her name, once buried beneath headlines and hushed tones, now echoed in rooms where survivors learned to breathe again. And the man who tried to reduce her to broken flesh? He became nothing more than a footnote in her story. Because Vanessa had taken back the pen, and she was still writing.